Let's talk collisions now. We're joined by Thembelani Mazibuko, researcher at the Electoral Insititute for Sustainable Democracy in Africa. Thembelani, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you, Unatsi. It's good to be on SA today.
Well, of course, this part and this conversation of talking about the collision forms part and parcel of our coverage of elections as we are 17 days away. Now, let's get into this. The 2016 local government elections yielded 27 hung councils where no single party achieved a 50% plus one majority, which obviously paved a way for coalitions, as it were. How much do you think that these attributed to the shocking lack of service delivery that we're seeing in the country and in several municipalities currently?
So it's hard to say definitively that service delivery process were as a result of coalition governments. I think it's an easy scapegoat. However, in many ways, the real underlying reason for service delivery issues is that in many municipalities, especially municipalities that are in rural areas, they do not have the kinds of skill, the technical skills in finance, in logistics, as well as other operational skills. They cannot attract those kinds of people in order to perform the functions. Because South Africa is still a relatively rural country and people tend to gravitate towards the big metros because that's where the opportunities are. The standard of living is better in those areas, schools, entertainment. So skilled people tend to be attracted to metros, whereas municipalities that are in more rural areas typically find it more difficult to find your highly skilled workers, and that has an effect on service delivery more than coalitions, because it's not the political parties who actually run the day-to-day running of the council. It is in fact civil servants.
How effective are coalition parties, though? I mean, if we have to look at certain municipalities where we've seen some form of relationship between parties, let's take Tshwane as an example. The DA got 43.1% of votes in Tshwane during the 2016 elections. They then went into a confidence and supply agreement with the EFF. And of course, we know that relationship quickly, spiraled out of control, leading in March 2020 to the Premier David Makhura then announcing Executive Council in the province was invoking Section 139, therefore declaring that the metro be under administration. So my question again, how effective are they, and should South Africans be hopeful this time around?
Yeah, so one must be circumspect and nuanced when judging the success of coalition governments, because in many cases, it can come down to the working relations between the leaders of the parties. If you look, for example, in the city of Cape Town, in the aftermath of the 2006 elections, one can argue, and that was a considerably bigger coalition with about 6 or 7 political parties, one can argue that Helen Zille did a very good job in terms of stitching the parties together and stitching the coalition together. And that led to perhaps the goodwill being accrued to the Democratic Alliance and therefore increasing their majority. So in that area, the coalition worked. In Nelson Mandela Bay, for example, there was a lot of infighting between the mayor, Athol Trollip, as well as the then deputy mayor at the time from the UDM. So in many cases, it does depend on the leaders of the council, of the various political parties. But to your question, yes, the very fact that you are now bringing different political parties together with different ideologies, that will then complicate issues and therefore lead to a council that is more prone to political instability, and that may very well filter down to service delivery.
All right, if we had to just face the reality that, coalition governments are a thing of the future and certainly a reality for South Africa, then, speak to me about 2 or 3 fundamental things that need to happen to change the political system, as it were, at local government level, so that we don't see what we're currently seeing now. I mean, I've never actually witnessed the electorate or even the public being so vocal during these elections than ever before.
Yeah, so it's hard to perhaps pin it down to a few things. I think it's numerous things. I think coalitions, by nature, remember, it's important to say what a coalition is. A coalition is the electorate saying, we don't trust any political party, so therefore you must work together in order to implement service delivery. So it is then incumbent upon the representatives who are elected to go from being politicians and to go to being public servants. So perhaps that is one of the prerequisites, the ability to put party differences aside. And indeed, that is actually easier at local level and compared to national level. So the ability to put perhaps your own factional views aside and perhaps compromise in order to work with other political parties. Another factor I would add is that perhaps one of the reasons why coalitions did not succeed in Gauteng is because you had two very different political parties. You have the Democratic Alliance, which tends to be more to the right, as well as the EFF, which tends to be more to the left, more radical, at least in their manifesto, coming together and trying to form a working government. So, and when you put that factor, and then you combine it on party leaders' egos, perhaps big characters who are perhaps unwilling to compromise, that then leads to unstable governments.
Thembelani, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Really do appreciate your analysis. Thembelani Mazibuko, researcher at the Electoral Institute for Sustainable Democracy in Africa.